Hi, I'm Matt Finch, and this is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood. And so I'm here to talk with Bill Silvey today about some interesting stuff. But if you'll please take a moment, if you enjoy discussions and conversations about Dungeons and Dragons, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so that you can get some more notifications on it. And Bill Silvey, in particular, the reason that I've got him on the show, he and I share two interests, one of which is first edition Dungeons and Dragons, and the other of which is terrain for all of that. And so we may wander around topic-wise, but the first thing that we're going to talk about is is a particular part of the old school Renaissance of people who play with the original books as opposed to using the retro clones like Swords and Wizardry or Osric. Bill, that's what we're going to start with. Go ahead. A lot of people know you because you're a real ambassador of the hobby. Go ahead and say hi to everybody.
Hi to everybody.
Okay. That was a really short hi to everybody.
Well, sorry. Yeah, generally, it's about a 50-50 split. When people think I'm a real A word, there's one of two possibilities of what that word can be. And ambassador is one of them. But it's a little self-deprecating humor there. But,
plus, the other thing is we're a PG-13, not a G show, so you are allowed to swear when you feel that it's necessary on this show.
Oh, so I could say asshole.
You can say asshole, okay. Absolutely, yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, so let me...
For example, I could say...
We don't really need to test it out in terms of the various words you can say. I'm just saying you can...
No, so, all right, that's fine. So I won't go all George Carlin, the 7 words you can't say on TV.
No, probably not. Okay, let's start out like I was saying. There are a bunch of different factions in the old school Renaissance. It's not a monolithic thing, and one of those sort of spectrums is the people who play using original books, people who play using sort of retro clones and things like that, bringing in more of the more recent stuff. And then you've got, some people who are playing actually 5th edition D&D largely because of the size of that community. And it's a current game. And if they're introducing, kids to something, they want them to not be embarrassed about suddenly discovering they're playing a different edition. Let's talk. Now, you're one of the group that advocates for the value of the the original Gygaxian books with the Gygaxian language, with the black line art, and the sort of all together there. You are going to be looking at a better experience than you are if you're looking at something that's been jury rigged more for legal purposes and so on. So let's start talking about first edition D&D specifically, since that's your particular edition of preference. Tell me a little bit about that. Let's talk about that.
Well, I can only speak from my own experiences with first edition AD&D. If you spend an afternoon on the internet looking up the history of first edition, you're probably going to get 5 or 6 different stories on how it came about. I know that what drew me into AD&D was the very thing that tended to put a lot of people off, and a lot of people, their spectrum of dislike of the AD&D books ranges from they're badly organized all the way up to, Gary Gygax was a jerk and it just oozes out of the pages. But for me, what drew me in, and a lot of people decry the complexity of AD&D. That's what drew me in. There was something, and is something still, in those books that spoke to me. And, for years as a kid, the 2 books that I had were, or rather the books that I had for AD&D were all Dungeon Master's books, which is probably why I DM 99.9% of the time now. When I would see players' handbooks, it was because I'd have players show up at the house with a copy of the player's handbook. But by and large, when I was reading AD&D books, it was the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. Now the Monster Manual is just it's a fun read. It's just fun to sit down and read through and look at, monster descriptions, to peruse the art. I mean, who didn't fall in? I don't care what your feelings about the AD&D rules are, but if you can't look at that group of adventurers, it's the plate that's opposite the treasure table chart in the back of the Monster Manual, and it's adventurers looking into an open chest. There's a very Ray Harryhausen like, angry eye skull sitting in the background near the chest, that sort of thing.
And the one with the spider, or is that in the player handbook? The one with the spider? No,
the one with the spider is earlier under the spiders section.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. And now let me throw in.
I can grab it off the shelf if you want.
No. That's fine. I think a lot of people will know what that illustration is.
But that, I mean, even just to look at that fires so many neurons in just the right way. It just pushes the right button. I think
it does. I mean, the Monster Manual was actually one of the things that drew me in too, because I was a Napoleonic wargamer, and so I was in those model stores, and hobby stores is what they generally were back in the 70s. And so I was there for a different purpose. I was looking at Napoleonic books and stuff like that. But the Monster Manual, I would pick it up, and I didn't know it was a game, because we're talking about, when I was like, 9, 10 years old or something like that. And games came in boxes, not in books. But it was this fascinating read in and of itself, even though there were numbers that, you didn't quite understand. What is hit dice at the time? But it really pulled you in a way that I think a lot of books don't. And then it was later, once the Holmes basic box was out, I was like, okay, here's the game. I'll figure out what it's all about from there.
Mm-hmm. And the Dungeon Master's Guide is such, I mean, the closest approximation to a book other than the Dungeon Master's Guide would be, I'm not sure if you ever read it's an old book that came out in the 70s, the Whole Earth Catalog. It's just this massive.
That wasn't even D&D though.
That wasn't even D&D. No, the Whole Earth Catalog was just this. It was this massive stuff. You look through it. These hippies put it together, and it was like, if you just wanted to pack up and go live in the wilderness in Alaska, you could order from these different companies, and it was just this. And then there were articles in it, and it was just this kind of disorganized mess, but it was wonderful. And I think reading, I had a couple of aunts when I was very young back in the early 70s who were kind of hippy dippy granola types, and they had one. And I remember, lying on the floor of their house reading for fun the Whole Earth Catalog, because it's like, oh, here's a sheep shearer, that sort of thing. But where that ties back into the D&D gestalt is the Dungeon Master's Guide is very much like that. It's this wonderfully, delightfully disorganized set of rules of things. And it is a conversation that Gary Gygax has with you, Dungeon Master. I'm going to talk to you, not down to you, not in the sense of, here's exactly how you should do it. But I think the term that I could describe the Dungeon Master's Guide best with would be, it is a conversation. It is a conversation between you and Gary Gygax. I mean, what is it under Cursed Scrolls? If you look under Cursed Scrolls, Gary wrote, you as a dungeon master, do whatever you can to get a player to read this, to read it. I mean, that kind of evil DMing. I mean, it's almost like you've got Gary sitting next to you saying, hey, You should really try and get them to read the Cursed Scroll. It's going to be hilarious. And that kind of engaged writing style that transcends fantasy stereo instructions that so many other rule sets have become over the years. And I'm not edition warring. I'm not saying specifically other editions of D&D, just, other rule systems, they don't feel organic. If you follow what I'm saying, they're just written down, here are your combat tables. Here's how they work. Here's random encounters. Here's how they work. That's it. The Dungeon Master's Guide is organized in such a way that it is a damn good read, even more so than the Monster Manual. And that's one of the reasons why I love it so much.
Yeah, and I think that, it is still a book that will hugely benefit both as a read and as a resource. Really, any edition of Dungeons and Dragons, no matter what people are playing, that book is worth reading in a big way. So,
Yep.
it's the one book that's stood the test of time, I think, over the course of editions, even if you're not so much looking at the details on the tables anymore. All of the text around those tables is, gold.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, without a doubt, a lot of people will give AD&D flack for the number of charts. And to those people, I say, go look at Rollmaster, then come back and complain at me about charts in AD&D. But all of those tables, there's nothing about those tables that says, and you can only use these in AD&D. I mean, I swear to God, I played for a few weeks with a group that the only fantasy role-playing game they would even consider that was even open for discussion was Harn. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the system.
I am, but probably a lot of the audience isn't.
Right. It's another fantasy role-playing game. It kind of prides itself on more of a realistic pseudo-medieval world with some fantasy elements. But yeah, I gamed with guys who played Harn, and they had the Dungeon Master's Guide handy for those tables, for those charts. It's just I think when I talked to Gary at length about it, he said, it's like a cookbook. It's just this massive cookbook, and it's wonderful. Likewise, the Player's Handbook. Player's Handbook's a little more mechanically useful, if you will. There's a lot in the Player's Handbook, a lot of good stuff in the Player's Handbook. But the Player's Handbook is, for me, of the three AD&D books, it is the least used. It's like, I mean, I love making characters, and I think that's probably true across our corner of the hobby, is that we all love making characters, even if it's something, you might never play. It's just a good mental exercise. But where the Player's Handbook, very, very quickly delineates what the classes do, how they function mechanically, and then you're into an equipment guide, and then you're into a spell list, and then, maybe bards, maybe psionics, and then farewell. You're done with that book.
Although it did have the what I think is the iconic Dungeons and Dragons image of what the game is all about, and that, of course, was the Trampier cover on the first printing of the Player's Handbook.
Yeah, the art. I mean, oh my God, we could do an entire episode just talking about art. I mean, I was just elated when Otherworld Miniatures bit the bullet and did that Demon Idol mini sculpt. I have one. It's in painting right now. I can't wait to have it done. I mean, it serves function as a piece to have on the table, and just as a gorgeous piece. I hope that my painting skills are up to the challenge.
For God's sake, your painting skills are like so far above most peoples that, you know,
Yeah. Well,
except when you're drunk, as you've pointed out, I think a couple times on the internet.
but yeah, I thank you for the compliment, but I do I want to finish that Demon Idol Sculpt, because you're right, that cover is so iconic. And when Wizards of the Coast, was it 2014, 2013 when they did the reissues? I'm gonna lean over here just to grab one of these. They did these. Oh, and as luck would have it, I grabbed the one. These are nice, but honestly, I mean, this is not a great tribute to that piece. This robs that piece of so much character, just having a sort of a cameo of it.
What we're looking at, by the way, is Wizards of the Coast around, I don't remember the date either, but say 2014. They came out with a reprint of the first edition D&D books. So the content in those books, which I think they cleaned up a little bit, but these are reprints that are faithful word by word with first edition, but the cover on that one, like Bill said, is different. Bill, talk a second. I'm going to look on my bookshelves to see if I have a first printing readily available.
Okay. But yeah, of the books, I mean, if I had to order them in terms of what I get out of them as a player, as a dungeon master, I would go Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and then Player's Handbook, which is not to say the Player's Handbook loses or is dead last. I just feel like that the DMG is really where it's at. It's the heart and soul of first edition AD&D in book form. I mean, you know, we the players are the life of the game, but as far as the spirit of the game, as far as, you know, what mechanically drives first edition AD&D, it's all in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I'll never forget, my sister was working at a store, a retail store in our neighborhood, and used a little bit of her employee discount to help me afford, with my allowance, my hardback copy of the DMG. And unfortunately, I don't have that one anymore. It went away when I was in college, and decided that I wanted I wanted some beer and pizza money more than I wanted my AD&D books. But when I got that book, I was in heaven.
Let's switch over then to so we've got a basic idea of the fact that, you know, this is why the original books are going to be of more value to players, and especially DMs, in terms of running a Dungeons and Dragons game. If you're just looking at it across all editions, you know, there's the point that it's not just the AD&D rules, it's the AD&D approach in Gygax's words, you know, with Trampier's illustrations and all of that. So let's talk a little bit, because you've been a long-term ambassador of the hobby, and specifically that hobby. Talk about how you do that.
Talk about how I ambassador, or talk about how I run AD&D?
How you ambassador.
How I ambassador. Well, I'm going to tell you, the chief way I do it is I go out and I game in game stores. I'm going to start this summer. I'm going to hit a couple of conventions that are local, but as far as cons go, back in the early 2000s, a friend cajoled me into. I had never run an adventure at a con before. I'd never run a con game. I'd never been to a gaming con, to be honest. And he said, "Oh, you know, you should totally come to the Historical Miniatures Gaming Society's convention. They have a room for role-playing gamers, so you should come and set up and play there." So I did that, and I thought, okay, I'll have 4 people. This guy's wife, I'm very good friends with these people, Greg and Becca. I thought, okay, she'll sit in my game, and I'll have, maybe 2 or 3 other people, and I'll have some yucks, and I'll go home. I had 10 people sign up for my AD&D first edition AD&D game, and of those 10, I would say that 4 always played at my AD&D games for the following, like, I want to say almost 5 or 6 years that I went to those events. And towards the end, it got to where it was a fairly primitive sign-up system they had, where basically you had a sign-up sheet at a kiosk at the front of the con where, you would come in, and I'd go up there to see who was signed up. And my sign-up sheet, it was a 5x7 card, would be full. There would be Post-it notes stuck to it. And usually if I checked on the back, someone would have written their name on the back with a note like, if anyone drops out, please, look for me in the such and such room. I want to play. And part of it was the visual appeal. I mean, we'll talk about the minis and the terrain. But people who had played AD&D and hadn't played it since high school, college, whenever, when they saw, hey, here's somebody running first edition AD&D, they jumped on the chance to play. And other people who had never played it came and sat down. And this is true even today when I just go to comic stores and run AD&D for people who've never played it before. The refrain is always the same, and it is, gosh, this is great. It's so simple. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to have a particular skill for my character. I just ask you and you say. Some people regard that
that's such a core feature to all of the earlier systems up before 3rd edition, I would say.
It really is. One of my newer, more favorite stories is I was running original D&D because I like to do that too. And as a lot of your viewers may know, in just core original D&D, all weapons do 1d6 damage. And all first level characters have the same chance to hit. Fighter, magic user, or cleric, they all have the same chance to hit. Well, I ran an adventure with first level original D&D characters, and one of the boss monsters, if you will, was an ogre. And who ended up beating the ogre to death? The magic user with his staff. 1d6 every time. And the player who was running the magic user again said that. He was like, wow, this was great. I didn't have to take a feat or I didn't have to have proficiency with staves or anything like that. I was just able to sit down and play. And that was so cool. And when people ask me in games that I'm running, okay, I want to run across the room and I want to do, I want to jump on a table and then slide under the other table and then whack this guy in the legs as I do that. But I guess AD&D doesn't really have anything like that. And I'll say, sure, execute a charge and just describe to me what you do. I don't care if someone says that during their course of moving across the room, they're swinging from a chandelier and, going all Chow Yun-Fat in a John Woo movie, jumping sideways with their crossbow like that as they're ripping the shot off. That's window dressing that they enjoy. It doesn't negatively impact AD&D in any way. It doesn't break any of the rules. It doesn't alter anything to say, tell me something cool that you're doing right now.
And it's not nothing either, because if you play the way I do, some of those things, when they're going to give you a tactical advantage, hey, I'm getting an echo on your thing. Let me try again. All right. So, all right, it seems to have gone away. Okay.
Oh,
So it's not nothing, because if they're doing something like that to get a tactical advantage, if you play the way that I do, it may give them definite tactical advantages in terms of, when you do get to the numbers, if it's a hit roll or something like that,
mhm.
whatever it is that they're trying to alter. But things can go wrong along the way. And so, I may be throwing a couple of dice, to
Exactly.
find out whether the chandelier is going to come out of the ceiling. But at the same time, I'm just making up those dice rolls based on the probability. And
Yep.
that sort of folds back into the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide that we were talking about, because the earliest section in there, prominent, is about probabilities, not about rules resolutions.
Hmm.
It's to let you learn how probabilities with your dice are going to operate,
Yep.
because that's a
That'll
really important key thing.
You get a stats lesson right out of the boat with a Dungeon Master's Guide, um, which was a little much for my 12 or 13-year-old brain at the time.
Oh yeah,
So
me too.
I kind of glossed over that and just got to the fun stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, but still, but it's there, and we're grown-ups now, so we can bring it
Yeah,
up.
we appreciate what it is now. But yeah, I mean, if something, again, if somebody's moving across a room and they say, well, I'm over by the door, but I want to go over there and attack, I treat it, I'll treat it like a charge, as long as there's not gross amounts of barriers between them and where they want to be. There's other situations where like you, I'll adjudicate it, with the die roll, or depending on what may happen, I may have the player use, and this is something I think really doesn't get nearly enough use, is saving throw. Are you going to trip and face plant as you attempt to parkour your way across the room? Well, give me a save versus, say, paralysis. I'm going to swing on a rope over the chasm to get to where the rest of the party is. Well, give me a save versus death. And you might modify it up or down based on whether or not they're wearing armor, what their dex is. But to go back to kind of come back around to the ambassadorial part.
Okay, before we do that, Bill, let
Okay.
me just point out to those who are watching who play 5th edition, when he's talking about a saving throw versus paralysis or a saving throw versus death, the early editions had very specific categories for saving throws. They weren't so much based on something related to your attribute. They were not the sort of 3rd edition style where it was fortitude, and so on, a group of characteristics. They were very specific. There was a saving throw against dragon breath, saving throw against death, which wouldn't necessarily mean it was death. And
right.
the characters had different tables reflecting those. And so when Bill's talking about a saving throw versus death, he's actually talking about a specific column of a saving throw.
Right. And I tell you what, I'll use save versus death just because it's a handy die roll and I want the player to roll a die for mundane things sometimes, like, I'm going to see if my dancing impresses the princess. Give me save versus death. And new players to just watch them go pale. Like, oh my God, what am I doing that might kill my character?
Okay, but so we were gonna cycle forward back to the ambassador for the hobby before I interrupted you so rudely.
No, that's okay. But no, it comes down to presenting AD&D or original D&D when I run original D&D in such a way as the version of D&D where what's on your character sheet matters less than what you it's the perfect balance, I think, of a Dungeons and Dragons that allows the player to pretty much perform any action within reason without having to consult a volume. Really, I mean, when you're rolling the dice, and this is just my opinion, in AD&D, you're hitting corner cases. You're hitting combat and spell casting that occurs out of combat and searching for traps and trying to disarm those traps or trying to sneak up on someone. The large majority of AD&D, the role-playing part of AD&D, is unfettered by any dice rolls. And I try to emphasize this to people at the table, that it's not important what, do you have skill and drive cart? Well, and this is one thing that again, to go back to a conversation I had with Gary, we talked about the AD&D, the D&D is an avatar-based system. If you go out in the world, if your character goes out in the world and you make it your career, or, you're trying to make it your career to go into dungeons, to explore ruined castles, to stalk around in the wilderness, there are base assumptions about what you do. Like, no, you don't need to make a ride check to get on your horse and ride away. Because if you're doing this, your character probably knows how to ride a horse. Your character should know how to swim or make a small snare to catch a rabbit to eat, that sort of thing. And people's eyes just light up when they realize that the rule of cool is the rule of the day. And that is that. And I try to emphasize that you don't have a million feats to keep track of. I ran a game recently of AD&D. We roll characters at the table at the comic store, and people are like, "Well, if we're going to make characters, isn't that going to take a long time?" Nope.
I do that at my convention games too, and every once in a while you see someone's eyes bug out.
Yeah, the longest process, the longest part of that process was buying equipment, because everybody was like, well, I'm not going to get a bunch of rope if you're going to get a bunch of rope. Well, I'm going to get a 10-foot pole. Well, who's buying spikes? And it was like, that was the longest process. But as far as 46 drop lowest, arrange to taste, let me know if you have anything 15 or better, and I'll let you know the bonuses for it.
Now, before we get off the question of the rule of cool and the fact that a lot of die rolls are not necessary, was somewhere on Knights and Knaves, I think it was, somebody said if dice are already being rolled, it means that the characters have already screwed up somewhere, or the players have already screwed up somewhere. Was that you that said that, or do you remember who it was?
That sounds familiar. I'm not sure if that's something that I said. It may be. But yeah, I mean, if I think there's a modicum of truth, because I think I think if the players have to start making saving throws in a serious context, not in the, give me a saving throw versus poison to see how drunk you are. But I mean, in a dungeon setting, then yeah, something has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah. And I had a lot of my patrons ask for me to do an updated version of that quick primer for old school gaming. And I realized that in addition to the, in addition to Jason Cohn's Philotomy's thing about rulings, not rules, that also that line about if the dice are rolling, it means you already screwed up, is another really, really central concept, I think, to old school stuff. But anyway, let's talk about how you bait the hook when you're at a convention. How is it that you draw people in? And I know the answer to that is terrain and minis.
Terrain and minis. I would say that it's a 33% mix. It's 33 old school D&D. People are fascinated by it. People in real life don't edition war. People don't walk up to you and say, screw old D&D. They don't. That it's an internet thing that has no traction in the real world. So we'll just put that aside. People, when they say, wow, this is the D&D from back in the, so they want to play old D&D and they want to see what it's like. Even if they don't ever come back to it, they can say, yeah, you know, I played old D&D. I played old school D&D, and they laugh and they have a good time. That's a third of it. Miniatures are the other third of it, because who doesn't like miniatures? When I was a kid, and this, we'd have to do a whole nother interview about how I started playing D&D, but literally the second thing I bought for Dungeons and Dragons was a box of Grenadier miniatures. So minis and D&D go together like peanut butter and jelly. When people look at me and they're like, I've never touched a mini in my life. I have one. You know, I have one unpainted mini that one of the players bought for me, but you know, I'm just like, what? Why are you even playing D&D? But you're doing it wrong. Go away. Learn how to do it right. No, I'm kidding, obviously. But
well, it's going back to edition warring on the internet. There are a bunch of people who talk about theater of the mind, and you know, these are the people who claim they've never used miniatures because everything's described in the head and so on and so forth. So we're talking just right. That's another faction, and again, it's not a real world thing. It's the other thing is. And this is where we get the dramatic pause with drum roll. Dwarven Forge terrain. I love Dwarven Forge terrain. Back in was it that far back? It was around 2000. I was looking for a tabletop 3D terrain. The concept just fascinated me. The idea of having walls and hallways, and I thought about different ways that I could do that. You know, I could get Lego and paint them gray and black and brown and dungeon walls that way. Another thing I looked at, and I know you actually did a video on this, was Hearst Arts. I looked at Hearst Arts, and I looked at different cardstock solutions, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. And when I sat kind of on the fence about, because it came down, there's papercraft dungeon stuff. If you have access to a color printer that you can get more than 8 or 10 cardstock pages out of, to do dungeon terrain with, then it's worth doing. But the $50 home color stinkjet printers, you're going to run out of ink. It's the price delta is not right for it. So I sat on the fence between going with a Hearst Arts type solution or buying this stuff that I was seeing in stores called Dwarven Forge. And the reason I didn't go with Hearst Arts was laziness. It's not quality. I've seen Hearst Arts stuff on tables before, and it's gorgeous. Yeah, it's incredibly time intensive though to make a whole.
I looked at it and I said, okay, be honest with yourself, Bill. How much time are you going to sink into casting Hearst Arts stuff to make a big enough dungeon crawl that will satisfy you? And I thought long and hard about it. And I said, nope, I'm going with Dwarven Forge. So I have this lovely terrain that I've collected over 18 years now. And it's fantastic. This is the candy that gets people to the table. When they see terrain setups, dungeon setups of Dwarven Forge pieces spread out on the table, and I always cover it with black cloths, the approximate size and shape of an area that the players are going to be going into. So it's literally fog of war. Now I leave it uncovered when they pass through it. It spares somebody at the table having to draw a map. Although sometimes people still do draw maps with Dwarven Forge, but people see that stuff at the table and they come over and they're like, what is this? I want to know what this is. I ran an RPG at Free Comic Book Day at my favorite local gaming store. And the store is kind of located in a touristy area. And there were people who were given the side eye to the whole idea of a comic shop. But they wanted to know what these castles that I had on the table were all about. Dwarven Forge is just a tremendous draw. Well, any terrain, any visual terrain, 3D terrain that you put out that's not just nerds playing Let's Pretend at a table. Any of that stuff. And by the way, I count myself in that nerd. Don't think that's me being dismissive of anyone.
We're all the nerds at the table. I don't think you're getting any disagreement there from the people watching.
Right. But when the Dwarven Forge comes out, people want to be there, and it almost the idea of, we're playing a specific edition of D&D here. Yeah, whatever. Uncover that stuff. Let me see it. I want to move my little figures through there, and I want to see it. I want to see more of it. And I've been fortunate enough over the years that back when Dwarven Forge was sold retail, a comic shop here in town would have an unadvertised buy one get one sale like a couple of days before Christmas. So the very first set of Dwarven Forge my wife bought me, she realized she could buy another set for free. So I was basically getting 2 sets, and I'm not going to open this up. I'm just going to hold this up on camera. 2 sets like this for $45 each, because they ran $90 for the room and passage sets. And every year they do it, and every year she'd load me up. So when I showed you earlier with a camera, all that stuff was basically gotten at half price. And every time I'd go to a con, I'd have a new set. And I think that was probably part of the draw was, what's Bill going to have on the table this convention? And I love it. It's a glorious pain in the ass. It's a huge...
It is a pain in the ass. That's why one of the advantages to the minis, to the terrain that I use, and I'm probably switching to something that's more like Dwarven Forge, but one advantage is that not having the walls attached to the floor, because that way, if you've just got them on a mat or a thing of some kind, you can fudge things a lot easier. You can just, I'm going to flip over this corner and it's going to work for something. I'm going to turn this sideways and it'll work for something. I'm going to scooch these walls together in not quite right angles, because when you can, with anything that's got the floor attached on the terrain, basically you have to have more precise angles, because for example, a 45-degree angle is going to go one way if it's attached to the floor, whereas if you have one that's free of the floor, you can flip it over and get the other 45-degree direction, and speed is a big issue.
Yep. And one of the things that I always, and this comes with a lot of 4th and 3rd edition D&D players, is I try to emphasize, when the Dwarven Forge is out there, it's a visual toy. It is there to look good. It is there to be neat looking. I mean, when I plunk down a dragon in the middle of it, generally the monsters are all in there. But if you got something that's just going to tower like this, for example, and then compare to this wall, it's you got to bring this guy out, but otherwise the cover that I put over him is going to tent up, and people are going to know, oh, there's something waiting for us there. Whereas you take a standard minion, you hide him in the, you put a cover over him, and they're not going to see that coming. But one thing that I emphasize to people is, despite the fact, and I'm sure, there's 2-inch or 1-inch grid squares kind of baked into Dwarven Forge. It's not, don't go, okay, I'm going to move forward 1, 2, 3. This is not a board game. I mean, unless it's absolutely critical, I won't even insist that the players move their miniatures into a hallway. I just want them to be able to see it. And sometimes, like if I'm playing a classic module at an event, but I don't have exactly the right precise pieces of Dwarven Forge to exactly precisely make a room or a hallway or a trap or what have you, I'll tell the players what you're seeing is an approximation. That hallway on the table is only 6 inches long. it's actually, which would equate to 60 feet. It's actually, in reality, the hallway is, 120 feet long, or rather 120 inches long. But I don't have 120 inches of just straight Dwarven Forge hallway. So, I make approximations and compromises because, again, it is a toy and a tool that looks good. There are times when, yes, very much when you're talking about spell casting distance,
Fireball.
area. Well, fireball. Yes, fireball is 33 of these. A 10 by 10 by 10 cube. It's 33 of them. Then it kind of becomes important exactly where your miniature is. And I will tell players, okay, during this combat, place your miniatures exactly where you are. When it's your round, if you're moving, move your miniature to where you're going to be. And those cases, yeah, I do kind of get a little precise. But by and large, it's really there as a neat visual prop. I like it. The players like it. They like moving around it. And I wish I'd gotten down one of my trap sets, because there's fun. The early trap sets that Dwarven Forge did had functional traps in them.
Okay, so Bill and I took a short break right there, and he went to go and actually get some of the Dwarven Forge stuff that he wanted to show. And also, I think you got a copy of that first edition cover that we were talking about.
Yes, that is it right there. Beautiful stuff. Dave Trampier's work in full, resplendent. This is, I think, one of the earlier prints. So rather than having Player's Handbook up here and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons down there, it's reversed. But it just happened to be the first one my hand fell on. That is such a great piece of art.
Also, if you open out the cover, it's actually both the picture goes from the front cover and the back cover.
Yes, you get that on back. Unfortunately, I don't know what that is called, is kind of in the middle of it, but the whole scene continues across. And I have heard this story, and I don't know if you have. All of these people, except for the magic user over here, are Dave.
Yeah, I've heard that he had a mirror on his desk that he used for whenever he had to do faces, and then that a lot of the people, not just in that picture, but that a lot of people who show up are Trampier.
Yeah. Thinking on it, I think Miracle.
Say that sentence again, because your audio went out.
Emir Call the Chaotic, the plate he did in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which, I mean, that's just great iconic AD&D art of the titular warrior magic user riding down a cobblestone street, which is actually a street in the Greek city of Rhodes, zapping somebody with some kind of terrible spell while everybody else looks on in horror or grabs weapons to deal with him. Thinking about his face, I think that's probably Dave too, but without knowing for sure, we'll just have to say it's a darn close approximation of him.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the point at which we took the break, you were going to get some of the early Dwarven Forge traps to show people.
Yes, I was. And probably the easiest one to show first, when I talk about working traps, I mean working traps. So here we have a fairly innocuous looking corner piece. And I have used these as non-trapped corners before. They're very handy for that. But if you look here, there is a hinge, if you will, in the corner. And into that, you can drop various terrible implements. And then you have a swinging spike wall that will impale characters as they move along. And then there's different implements you can drop into there. There's a single spike if you want to go all Conan the Barbarian. Just slam right into somebody. And there's a if you want something to scald them with. Can I get that? There we go. There's a pot you could stick green slime in there or what have you, and then it just snaps out and slams into the characters. And it's so much fun to have this corner just sitting on the table. And then, I say, okay, all right, move your miniatures in there, put them in marching order. Okay. And then I just rotate that out right into the front ranks. It's great. And there's a piece, and I cannot believe I did this. And I don't know if you want to break again for this. When I said functional traps, I mean, obviously these work with your fingers, and there's the Indiana Jones boulder trap. I got to be careful because that's precariously perched. I'm not as big a fan of this as you might think, because you look and you see, and I'm going to let this boulder roll off. It does that. Well, if you put it in the hallway like this, thusly, and the boulder rolled off when I wasn't ready for it to. Okay, so that's kind of the perspective of the players. Well, I don't really want this thing caroming into my painted miniatures. So I'll use a little dot of blue tack on that and say, you open the door and then the boulder rolls on you. Well, does a boulder really roll? Not on those miniatures, it doesn't. But if they're just, we're just using the D&D minis, like this isn't a character, but here's one of the Wizards of the Coast D&D minis. It's plastic. Yeah,
those were great because people would save the rares and then sell off a lot of the commons, and it was the commons that I wanted to get for the most part. And so you could pick up tons of those.
I've got boxes and boxes of those things. But to go back to the traps, there is a set, and I could kick myself for not getting this down, because there is a trap set that actually has like spring-loaded traps in it. Like, I, as the DM, can reach over and tap on the piece of Dwarven Forge and cause a trap to activate. And I can't believe I didn't grab those down. Where are those?
Well, we can keep moving on. I mean, that gives, having shown the one, I think people can visualize, the extra effect of the spring loaded on there, which would be pretty awesome.
There's just, and it's one of those things that when I uncover it, it's half the surprise is gone, because okay, we can see the log is on the chains and it's on the archway right in front of us. And I just lean in with a pencil and tap the right stone on the table. But when they see that trap work, people are like, oh, that's so cool. So again, it goes back to being, this being great visual draw for people. I love it. And the neatest thing in the world, I'll tell you what, is to have this sitting out and see my kids play with it. My two daughters. I'd run a game out usually I'm back here in my office when we run the games, but I had one set up on the dining room table. We played all Friday night. I got up Saturday morning and I come out and the dungeons are slightly rearranged, and sitting in them, in addition to the monsters and the miniatures and stuff, are these little, like, inch-high collectible My Little Pony figures. And my daughters were rolling dice and just making stuff up as they went. When I kind of looked in on this, I just sort of leaned around the corner because I could hear them. And I just crept back to my bedroom thinking to myself, this is proper. This is how things should be.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Very, very proud of that. So it's impossible, like, out of shot. The whole time I've been doing this, I've been picking this up and fidgeting with it because I can't help it.
And you got the pre-painted stuff, right? Or
the old school stuff always came painted. This is by their Chinese artisans when they had when they had the resin stuff. And this is very solid. I don't know if you heard the knocking there.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Very, very, very solid stuff. It is not indestructible. I've dropped a piece like this on the floor before, and it's dented the linoleum. I've dropped tiny pieces on the floor, and they've shattered like glass, and I've had to pick them up and carefully glue them back together. What they do now, and I'm going to launch into an infomercial for Dwarven Forge if I'm not careful, so cut me off if I get too much like that, is the Dwarvenite, which is essentially a high-impact ABS plastic. It's black. I just put a smudge of paint on it there. These are about, and don't quote me on this price, please. Anyone watching this, go look this up. This is not a direct price quote, but these are about 20% cheaper if you get the unpainted. I painted these myself. That's my painting. And all in all, it took about 4 hours to paint 150 pieces of Dwarven Forge, because the painting methodology is really simple. It's a base coat, detail a few bricks, one level of dry brush, another level of dry brush, and you do it with 4 paints, and you just have to mechanically grind through putting them up. This is what they look like when they're not painted. These are the doors I haven't done yet, and it's just black, durable plastic. These, I have a Tupperware tub that I can throw into. These come in custom cut foam trays that fit in boxes, and I picked one up earlier and showed it. So while I like a lot of stuff that they do, or rather that they did in the resin, they don't do it anymore, and which is unfortunate because I do like it. But this stuff it's indestructible. There's a YouTube video your viewers can hunt down and find, where when they first introduced this, one of the employees climbs up on a water tower, throws a piece off, and then somebody drives over it with a truck. And they go down there and pick the piece up, and it's just fine.
That's awesome.
It's all done in one take. So
I'm actually kind of glad that you're doing a thing on Dwarven Forge, because like you mentioned, I've had Bruce Hurst on here. I've also had Tom Tellis on here talking about the 3D printed plastic, and then he also covered, since Fat Dragon Games did paper stuff as well, he sort of talked about paper, and I got both of them to talk about relative benefits and stuff. And at some point, I'm going to get Stefan Picorni on here, but out of everybody in the world, I have the least idea of where Stefan is going to go to if I, when I bring him on a video. So to have somebody do a concise infomercial on Dwarven Forge on Stefan's behalf is probably helpful.
Well, I'm an evangelist for this stuff. I'm an evangelist for 3D dungeon terrain and building terrain on the tabletop in general. Dwarven Forge was the first. Well, I should qualify this statement. If you go back and you look in Dragon Magazine, literally going back to the mid-1970s, there are companies that were making stuff like this, but none of them ever lasted.
The materials science back in that day, wasn't anywhere near what we've got right now. Nothing.
One of the things is, I was lamenting the fact that when Dwarvenite was on the rise and resin was kind of in its twilight at Dwarven Forge, there were periods where I would have money to spend and I wanted to buy Dwarven Forge, and they did, just like everything was constantly out of stock except for the Dwarvenite stuff, which at the time were just a few basic sets. And so finally, in my frustration, I emailed them and I said, look, what is going on? Their resin water sets are just to die for. And I thought about getting a resin water set down to show off. It, as nice as my webcam is, it doesn't do it justice. You have to see their acrylic and resin water sets in person. I wanted those. I wanted more of those. I have a small cavern, river, and lakes set that, I want to be able to set up, the Black Reservoir from Castle Greyhawk on my table in Dwarven Forge. But they never had any in stock. Or they get it in stock, and it'd be like, aha, next weekend, and then it'd be out of stock again. So I finally, I emailed them, and I said, okay, what's going on? Because I have money, I'm literally like the Fry meme, shut up and take my money. But you guys won't take my money. What's going on? Part of what is happening is that they maintained the price on Dwarven Forge for years and years. When I was talking about an $89 room and passage set, that price lasted probably for over a decade. And when you look at the cost of anything else in gaming, books, miniatures, paints, even dice. I mean, this is crazy. At GaryCon, I wanted to buy a set of Game Science dice at GaryCon. One vendor had them, and it was like $15 for a basic set of dice. I was just like, whoa, what's happened?
Okay, but swing back to Dwarven Forge. What was the email you sent them? What was their answer to it?
So I sent, and they said, okay, here's what's going on. One of the things that's happening is this resin, at least part of the makeup of this resin, is identical to what's done in the manufacture of cell phones. And the people that know how to work with this material, they're very, 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 very in demand in China. So it's just basic economics. Our factory can crank out, the backs for a Galaxy phone, or we can make toys that a guy's going to buy one shipping container every 6 months of this stuff. And that's, they said when they were doing the resin stuff, they had to order it by the shipping container, but they had to wait until they were completely sold out and the demand was built up to justify buying, $500,000 or whatever the cost was. I'm just made up number of resin, Dwarven Forge.
Now they've got that problem pretty well under control now. I mean, you still see a lot of stuff out of stock when you go there, but with the Dwarvenite, they've got a lot more.
Yeah, because the cost on this is so much less for what you get now, and I think it's opened up to a lot of people. I like when I got the 3 sets of the Dwarvenite pieces, they were in boxes about this big because they were all crammed together and, stacked one on top of the other like that, just, packed into this tiny little box. And it was 3 boxes about the size of a lunch box, about that big. And it was 150 pieces, 160 pieces, something like that. And compare and contrast that to that massive box that I showed you. That is, if I can look there,
it's filled with foam packaging and stuff like that to protect the resin.
There's cut trays with, each piece like this is in its own 2x2 section. And I mean, just when you look at the cost efficiency and that sort of thing, and it's like, this is durable and I never have a problem with anyone picking it up and looking at it. But if they want to I want to take this over and show my friend over here, I'm like, no, let's keep that over the table. Okay.
Right.
Whereas with this, I'm like, yeah, here, take a piece. You know?
All right, I think we may separate these videos so that this one matches up with the Tom Tullis one and the Bruce Hurst one, and then keep the earlier part separate. But so let's go ahead and close it out on just for time reasons on the video. Anything else you want to say about Dwarven Forge or about AD&D? Bring it up now, and then we'll probably close out.
Okay, I want to say this about AD&D. If you're out there and you're playing 5th edition, which is a fine version of D&D, don't get me wrong. give AD&D a try. Really, just give it a try. It's a great game. It's open. There's a ton of stuff available through the OSR and Osric, so it's not like, well, I can get it and then what? Just some old modules that everybody's played. No, AD&D is a vibrant game. Just give it a spin, give it a try. I think you will be pleasantly surprised if you've never played it before. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by just how good of a game AD&D is. So yeah, that's my feeling on the subject.
Awesome. And so let me just say to everybody who's watching, and probably especially for this show, whatever kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.
Indeed.